Hello and welcome to Rack IT Up. Select the right server rack for your customers. Sponsored by Vertiv. My name is Ed Hannon, and I'd like to welcome you to today's program. And I'm joined today by Rich Symmons, Offering Manager with Vertiv, and John McGreevy, Director of Global Offering and Channel Enablement, also with Vertiv. And we're going to get started right away with the first question, and this one's for Rich. Rich, how's the design of a rack changed throughout the years?
I think when a lot of people think about the rack, they usually think about the 19-inch standard, EIA 310 standard, and that really hasn't changed for 50 odd years, but everything around it has. I think a lot of people are under the impression that racks haven't changed a great deal, but that they absolutely have, and it's a lot of it is to do with what's going into the rack and the changes that are happening there and the need to respond to that. So I think the big changes that have driven the design evolution of racks come around density. So if you look back 10 years ago, you might have seen one large 10U piece of equipment. It's whatever it's providing in terms of compute and storage, but it was taking up a lot of space and maybe not consuming a lot of power. Now, of course, we've seen IT hardware condense. Now you've got 1U servers that probably produce more compute or storage power than that 10U device did. And of course, there's byproducts of that. And the obvious ones are there's an immense amount of heat because you're putting all of these powerful 1U servers into the rack. But also things like cable management. There's more copper, there's more fiber, there's the need for more outlets on the rack PDUs. So all of those things happening have really driven a lot of change around the rack design outside of that 19-inch space. I think about all of the cable management options that you now see and now have access to. Back in the day, it might have just been some cable rings. Now we have to manage copper, we have to manage fiber, and there's different ways of managing them both. When I look at airflow management as well, when you have that much heat in there, again, 10 years ago, you'd see that rack and there'd just be a big empty void. You could see all the way through, no blanking panels, things like that. Now you have to be a lot more conscious because the amount of heat can become a problem. So again, a lot of accessories going around it, and the actual frame of the rack as well. The weight loads that people are putting in the rack has shot up as well. And not just on the static front. So again, you see empty racks and people rack and stacking on site. That has an impact on the static weight load. But more and more, we're now seeing customers having their IT gear integrated off-site. And that's a different challenge because that rack then has to go into a truck. It's going over bumps and lumps in the road, a lot of vibration. Then it gets to site and you've got to push it on those casters. The actual framework, which you don't really see, but there's been a lot of changes there as well to support not only higher weight loads, but different ways people are deploying their IT with the integrated stacks coming to site and just rolling out. So there has been a lot of changes over the years, and all of it is to do with what people are putting in and how they're deploying their IT.
Given all that, given the complexities and the changes that have happened over the years, I feel like I know the answer to this next question, but you're the expert with this stuff. But how important is the selection of a rack?
You're right. I'm a rack person, so of course I will say absolutely vital. But that aside, I don't think I'm overstating it when I say the rack is the base building block of everything that goes into an IT space, whether that's a single rack, server room, hyperscale data center, and the racks are there to support the IT gear. And the IT gear is running applications. That's where the magic happens. The first line of, support for that IT equipment is the rack itself. And if the incorrect rack is chosen, at the worst case scenario, things might break, bringing the IT equipment down. And of course, nobody wants to talk about downtime. It's just a no-no. So getting the right rack to make sure that physically it's going to support what you're deploying in there, how you're deploying it, that's very important. But also, as I mentioned, with some of the design changes that we've seen in the rack, airflow is also vital. If you select the wrong rack, if you select the wrong accessories to go with it, and you're not managing that airflow correctly, again, that can have an impact if all of that hot exhaust air is recirculating within the rack. that can impact the IT equipment. So it's often overlooked as it's just a rack. And on face value, sure. But when you start putting the IT equipment in, it becomes a different environment with lots of different considerations. And of course, we've all seen the pictures. If you've ever seen a rack presentation from anyone, you've seen those pictures with a big rat's nest of cables. You'd like to think that those aren't real or they don't happen anymore. And probably it's not as bad as the ones we all show in our rack presentations, but it's real. And, if that environment is not managed correctly, if someone says, okay, we need to change out a device, I don't want to be the person who's guessing which cable I'm going to pull out, and then all of a sudden the email server goes down or the website goes down, the revenue generating portion, because the right rack wasn't selected, it wasn't managed correctly. So it is a really important factor. Again, often overlooked, but what we try to do is make sure the rack at least comes with all of the standard out of the box features so that it's usable and it's a good environment. And then all of the accessories go around it to kind of right size it to what the customer is actually putting in the rack.
Rich, are there any common mistakes that end users make when they're purchasing a rack?
Yeah, there are. And I've kind of alluded to some of those mistakes as we've been talking. Selecting the right rack from a weight load perspective and considering both the static weight load limit and the dynamic weight load limit if customers are integrating off site, making sure that is in line with what you're deploying is we see that mistake happen, and it can have some consequences that you don't really want to see. So that's an important one. And again, I think the other main one is around ensuring that the rack is not just a rack, it's a rack system. And whether you use all of these options and accessories on day one, also have in mind what's going to happen in day two. Changes and adds happen all the time. And it may be the example of moving from copper to fiber inside that rack, ensuring that rack system offer has that full suite of accessories, because you may be okay on day one. Day two, you might deploy something. You need to know those accessories are there to handle that as well. So they're the common ones that we see.
I have to think that some of that is what it's going to do for you, but not how it's going to affect you. Like, it's like, this is going to help us, but there's going to be some things that come with that maybe we didn't account for, that we need to think about days 2, 3, 4, and beyond.
Absolutely. And these racks, they even if the day one installation is well thought out, there's always changes. You don't necessarily want to be every time you deploy a new server having an absolute mission on your hands. It should be straightforward. And maybe it's just a case of you need an additional accessory for now we're introducing fiber into that rack. We know we have to handle that a little bit differently than copper. There should be an accessory in that portfolio that you can just buy, install, and then deploy that IT gear, and you're not having to run your fiber through the mass of copper, which again, we know that can lead to issues from a data transmission perspective. So, and again, the future is always a little bit uncertain, but make sure that, the rack vendor, the rack offer you're working with has that forward-looking viewpoint, and they can see the bigger picture, the everything else that goes into that server room or data center.
Excellent. Well, John's not just here to be a pretty face. We're going to let John help answer this next question. But I'm going to start with you, Rich. To all the things we've been talking about, are you seeing, with all that, any innovation in the server rack space?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And I think a lot of it is is happening around where people are deploying their IT, and again, the changing ways of how people are doing that. So we all talk about edge a lot, but with this digitization journey that everybody is on, we are seeing IT devices supporting critical systems in locations we would not ordinarily have expected that. If you go back 10 years, you walk into a fast food restaurant, for example, you see all of these nice big screens with the menu on. You can customize it, have it your way. There is some IT equipment supporting that. And that building was designed to be revenue generating, producing food. So there may not be a server room in there, But now all of a sudden we need IT equipment. So do you either cut down the kitchen and reduce your revenue generating space to make a server room, or do the people like us come up with solutions that you can drop that IT into an environment like that? And it goes beyond those spaces as well. You look at the industrial space as well, industrial automation. There's IT going on in there somewhere. Where is it going to go? So I think we see a lot of innovation. We're driving a lot of that around the physical environment that the IT is being deployed in. And again, I mentioned that shift a little earlier in one of your questions around how people are deploying it. The days of the empty rack and then rack and stack server by server on site, they're still happening, of course, but we are seeing that shift to customers having this integrated, whether it's by a system integrator, a partner, or by their own centralized IT group, and then shifting it out into these distributed locations. That's really the innovation you may not see, but it's all of that work that goes to make sure that rack supports that IT equipment as it's going along in the truck, as it's being pushed along the casters. Again, you wouldn't necessarily notice that, but the dynamic weight load, the engineering that has to go on behind that to ensure it does get to site and your IT gear, the rails haven't collapsed and you see a mass of broken servers on the bottom, that stuff can't happen. So a lot of innovation is going on there to ensure that IT gets where it needs to go and we don't slow down deployment. But I think John probably has a very good perspective on this, because a lot of the innovation is happening around the complementary solution that goes around the rack as well. Because of course the rack is just one thing. There's a lot of other subsystems that need to come together. So I think probably, John, I'll throw it over to you. I think you've probably got some insight on the full solution side.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just a couple of thoughts, and really piggybacking on what you said in part of your example. The server rack in your example, Rich, and in some ways is becoming that data center for our customers, depending on the environment that we're talking about. So if you think of a hospital or a large retail store location as an example, the rack itself, the UPS, and all of that IT equipment is the critical operation for that location and really needs 24/7 availability. So that equipment, all the core business processes supported by that equipment, and just as importantly, the data in those customer environments is mission critical. One other trend we're seeing, and it's been the last couple of years, that approximately 70% of rack sales through the IT partner network now are requiring some sort of pre-install equipment, and that can be same manufacturer like Vertiv, or can include certainly other manufacturers' hardware and software. So in that way, the configurability and flexibility of that rack platform is key to meeting those existing needs, as well as the future needs for those customers.
Excellent. Now that first section was basically talking about setup. Now this next question is really about identifying the problem. So Rich, I'm going to bring it back to you. What challenges do end users face when purchasing racks?
There's some I say simple ones, but these challenges still happen. But the IT equipment cannot get up and running, which really is all the end user cares about, is making sure that application is running, making sure the IT gear is running. That cannot happen without a rack. So the rack becomes this potential choke point in entire rollout if it's not there. So I think speed and reliability of delivery of racks, making sure they're available, the racks are there, they're readily available, they conform to the industry standards. If that isn't happening, then there is that challenge where a customer places a PO for the rack and it's not arriving. The IT gear is sitting there in boxes. Someone on the business end is saying, hey, we need to get this up and running because maybe it's powering our website and we're an e-commerce site. It seems a silly little thing, but when that, the rack has a knock-on impact for the entire IT project rollout. So again, making sure that rack is readily available and it's usable out of the box. That's one of the challenges some people may face, because again, it's just a rack. There's a lot of other things to worry about. We'll just select that one, and then it just doesn't turn up. The next one is around, I think, this dealing with this increasing density. I'd say it's fairly straightforward to deal with on day one. But again, a lot of the focus is on the IT gear. And then you've got all this IT gear. Oh, how do we rack and stack it? How do we make sure that the cables are all dealt with? That is a big challenge, even on day one. But that challenge gets more critical as we see changes and adds. So new IT devices coming into the rack. Okay, now we don't know how to deal with this. Now there's a different technology going on inside the rack. So that we often see that as well with customers that we work with, and we say, it's you really got to look at not just the rack, but making sure all those accessories are there, making sure you're working with a rack system company rather than just a rack. And then to John's point as well, it's about the larger solution as well. That rack is always going into an environment, or it should always be going into an environment where there is a level of cooling, there's a level of power protection, there's rack power distribution. So all of those things, again, you don't really want to see 5 different vendor solutions or products coming together on site and realizing they don't fit together. It goes back to that whole IT deployment rollout. That's when you see delays. We do still speak to customers who have said, we went down that path and tried to bring it all together and it just didn't work, or it delayed us. And then in year 3, when we tried to change out some of this technology, because we know technology is always evolving and fairly rapidly, which is what's driving these densities up, not having a day 2 option to kind of make that IT environment workable. We see a lot of customers with that challenge as well. And we hate to see someone pulling a rack out and trashing it. 1, it's not particularly good for the environment. And 2, those racks should last a very long time. We should not be refreshing the physical rack every 3 years, because that thing should go on for 10 years. It's steel. It's strong. It's tough. As long as it's supporting and the complementary accessories are supporting this constant evolution of the IT equipment, there's no need for racks to be discarded after a couple of years. So we do see that challenge, unfortunately, and it's you've seen the size of these things as well. Even a 42U is a handful to worry about disposing of, let alone some of the bigger, taller racks. That challenge is one. It kind of gets to me a little bit, because it's just a waste, and it doesn't need to happen. So that is another challenge we try to help customers with, to ensure that, again, not just looking at day 1, looking into the day 2, day 3, a little bit into the unknown, because we don't absolutely know what's going to happen there. We make sure we're up to date with technology. We know what's going on, and if a good example is some switches, they have funky airflow patterns. So everything should be going front to back. Some switches have side to side airflow. Try putting that into a normal rack on day 2. You're going to have some localized hotspots where that air is not getting where it needs to go, and the exhaust air is not getting where it needs to go. Those challenges, again, if there's no solution for it, you're left to your own devices to figure out how to do that, or you suffer the consequences of hot air recirculation. So there's a ton of stuff, a ton of common challenges we see, but really the nuts and bolts of it are around making sure, 1, you don't delay IT deployments, and 2, you can handle what comes in the future when you do these changes and adds.
Well, speaking of solutions, let's talk about solutions. So again, we're going to bring John back in for the second part of this one, but Rich, I'll start with you. What should partners consider when recommending racks to their customers?
So there's everything that goes in the rack, which I've touched on quite a lot, and all of those accessories. So that's absolutely key. Don't just look at the rack. Make sure you're looking at all of everything that goes inside the rack. The accessories, rack PDUs, things like that. But then, and I think John's better placed to respond to this part, it's that outside of the rack piece that is equally, if not more critical, to make sure you've got a good environment for your IT to run efficiently and reliably. So John, I'll throw that one over to you on the outside the rack front.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, customers, as you're hitting on, deploy solutions across multiple product vendors and multiple product categories. So it's important to work with someone like Vertiv that has the full portfolio and then therefore guarantees that compatibility. So Vertiv has always stood by and guaranteed that additional manufacturers, networking, computing equipment, everything Rich is mentioning outside of that rack space will be compatible when using Vertiv rack platforms and rack solutions.
Speaking of Vertiv, and talking about, obviously we're talking about racks today. Rich, pivoting back to you for a sec, what does Vertiv offer for racks?
So we do have an ever-growing portfolio of rack systems. It starts with our VRIT range. So the Vertiv VRIT range is your IT rack, but also I mentioned rack system versus just rack, all of the accessories that go around it. So the VRIT range, it has all of the industry standard sizes, starting with 42 and going upwards from there. You've got the different widths as well. So we've got two different widths, one which is the 600 mil wide or equivalent to 24 inches, most commonly used for compute server deployments. Then you have the 800 wide, which is more commonly used for, there might be a denser networking rack in the middle of the row, something like that. Maybe cabling at the front. So you need that extra width to deal with all of that cabling as well. Then there's a couple of different depths, the 1100 and the 1200. We are seeing IT equipment pushing deeper. So we do have that deeper 1200 rack if the IT equipment is going that direction, to ensure that you can fit your A and B rack PDUs in the back and you still have ample space to deal with those cables. So that's really the core models on the IT racks. And then we have all of the accessories that go around it, and that's ever expanding. Like I said, there's all this IT equipment that keeps getting released, and we say, okay, well, there's a quirk there that we need to manage, so we bring out an accessory for that. And that's things like cable management, really key. Airflow management, also a really big one to ensure that the rack is operating as it should. Things like security options as well, something I haven't mentioned yet. But of course, the rack is the first line of defense against people. Hopefully it never happens, but you do need that level of security to ensure that the IT equipment is enclosed and it's protected from whatever outside source. So different security options there as well. Going beyond that's more in the conditioned IT space, the server and data center. We're also starting to broaden that into these other environments that John and I spoke about. So we have a solution called the VRCS, which is, in the commercial retail spaces, it's a contained enclosure, so a micro DC type solution, and it's got built-in cooling, active cooling in there. If someone's deploying one server, for example, the heat load is fairly low, still needs to be managed, but we are seeing more and more IT gear being deployed in these areas. So the VRCS solution has active cooling inside that rack. Again, it doesn't have to go into a server room at that point. It could be put in the corner, and that IT gear will happily run. It's going to be cooled. So we are broadening our portfolio into areas outside of the conditioned data center server room space as well.
Rich, we're all done with you, so you're off the hook for the rest of the program. But I'm going to pivot back to John for a second for these last couple of questions. John, how is working with a vendor that has a complete portfolio? How does that help partners out?
Yeah, leading with Vertiv Rack Solutions will open the door for our partners to sell other offers into that same space for that same or adjacent environments. So if you think about it, all other IT manufacturers, and Rich touched on some of them, in the server, networking, storage space have core rack-based product offers. So Vertiv solutions range from the rack to the battery backup or UPS, power distribution, cooling, management, software and services. So overall, a complete portfolio offers a lot of opportunity for our partners. One other point I mentioned before is that with regards to third-party other manufacturer space, Vertiv guarantees that compatibility within our rack environment. We are very, very focused on enabling our partners to solve real customer challenges. So in enabling them, we have tools. We have a recently released Vertiv Solutions Designer, which is a rack and row-based tool for our partners to build out configured solutions. And we have other configurator tools that our partners would benefit from in terms of recommending Vertiv solutions.
Excellent. And then just to wrap this up and give everyone watching and enjoying the program something to take away with them, where can partners who have watched today's program go when they want to learn more about Vertiv solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend partners go to visit our website, vertiv.com, to learn more about our rack and enclosure lines, as well as all of our additional other product offers. They can learn more about our Vertiv partner program via our partner portal, partners.vertiv.com. And I would highly encourage new partners to go ahead and sign up if they visit that page to become a new partner. Overall, it's a very simple process. Takes no more than probably a minute in terms of filling out the information, and partners can expect a 24-hour turnaround time in terms of the response to joining the program. Once in the program, partners will benefit from basic partner program benefits like deal registration discounts, VIP rewards, and we certainly use that portal as a mechanism to communicate product launches and other promotional activity. And on that, if I could, Ed, on that topic, I would like to take this as an opportunity to announce a channel-wide rack promotion that we're going to be launching here in the United States and Canada, probably by the end of April. So this is a bit of a pre-announcement, but I just wanted to let everyone know that we will, on all of our VR racks, have a promotion available through our IT distributors and electrical distributors late April through the end of Q2. And it will really be twofold. One is all partners can expect a discounted price on racks through the distribution channel. And then for partners within our Vertiv partner program, they'll see an additional healthy rebate type spiff on all VR racks purchased through IT distributors. So excited to share that with everybody.
Excellent. And I just want to let everyone know that we've actually reached the end of today's program, but I want to again thank my guests, Rich Symmons and John McGreevy, and thank all of you for watching. And once again, you've been watching Rack IT Up, select the right server rack for your customers. And I'm Ed Hannon. Thanks so much for watching.